Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review a Megan Fox movie, Till Death. So, there's a number of reasons why I'm reviewing this movie, because I always like to be at least honest with people or forthcoming. So, main reason why I'm reviewing Till Death is because, one, it seems like Megan Fox movies have done, interestingly enough, fairly well for whatever reason. And so eventually I found out that Till Death is going to be coming soon to Netflix. And so I was like, okay, well, I might as well review this movie because every once in a while I've started to do some coming soon to Netflix kind of reviews. And I'm assuming Till Death will be an interesting enough movie to have people be interested in it eventually. So that was kind of the way of which that I went about this. So go ahead and wait a couple of days eventually from the second of this recording till Death is on Netflix. Or you can go onto Vudu and watch this for 99 cents, weirdly. I thought that was weird. Or you can go onto an app called Fox HD Movies and watch a number of films. Like I just recently reviewed Empire Records, and Empire Records was on that app that I saw, or otherwise you'd have to go to Stars to watch it there. So, anyways, I went on and so Till Death. What was the reason why I watched this movie? Was also while I was watching this movie, the thing that got me interested was the whole concept of the movie. Eventually, once we get to the little beats and whatever the beginning of the film, eventually I started to realize that this movie is to very much be similar to this movie called Gerard's Game. And I'll quickly try to tell you what Gerard's Game is like, because it's not the exact same movie, but it's similar. So Gerard's Game, we end up having two people end up going into this kind of reserved home, and supposedly there isn't going to be anybody there for X amount of days. So this couple wants to go and try to desperately put spice back into their marriage by going and having much more aggressive sex kind of things than they had before. So all of a sudden we end up eventually having this XES moment with this couple, and so this girl ends up handcuffing herself to this bed. And then we have this husband who ends up going and taking this little blue pill, let's just say. And so all of a sudden, we eventually had this argument between this couple, because it seems that they're probably just going to go through the same old kind of lovemaking session. And this guy is like, no, I want to try something different. I want to do something different. You're saying that we're going to try and spice up our marriage, right? And we have the wife who's just like, well, I think I'm kind of fine the way things are. And so eventually, once we have this argument, all of a sudden we end up finding out that the husband all of a sudden has a heart attack during this whole moment, and he ends up falling over dead. And remember, we have the wife who's handcuffed to the bed, with both her arms being handcuffed to this bed to where she can't move her hands easily. She's stuck. And so all of a sudden, this movie turns into a survival movie where all of a sudden this woman who has been several days without food or water or anything eventually is to start slowly but surely losing her freaking mind. We end up finding out that this woman has had a very dark past and is just kind of reflecting on certain moments. Plus also, we have this moment where her husband is to seemingly come back to life to talk to her, and it's very weird. So we have these moments where this woman is obviously losing her mind and even talking to probably herself at any moment. Or there is also at one point where this dog ends up coming in, and it's like a wild dog. And is to end up just kind of chewing and gnawing at her husband's body, her husband's dead body, which is crazy. So check out Gerard's Game if it sounds something interesting to you. Uh, but yeah, go ahead and check it out. Like it's an interesting enough movie, but I don't know, people might find it different. I think it's also like a Stephen King book. I'm not sure because it's been a while since I've watched that film. So, but what is Till Death about? So, Till Death is about, and here's how it's similar. Till Death is a movie where we are to eventually find this couple who ends up going into this lake house that is to seemingly be out in the middle of nowhere. The only thing that is surrounding really this place is to be snow and a crap ton of ice. So eventually we have this couple who ends up going into this home and they end up going to bed together and they're kind of reflecting on their relationship that they've had with one another. And so eventually, like the very next day, when it seems the husband, who is Mark, is to wake up, and then eventually Emma is to also wake up, the first thing that Emma is to see is one, Emma is now cuffed to Mark, and Mark blows his own brains out. And so now Emma, who is cuffed to her husband, I guess really till death do they still not part. Emma is now having to look through this entire place to find a way to uncuff herself from her husband. And we honestly end up really finding out how much she really hates him and vice versa. Because we at some points eventually have Mark sending Emma a message like post-mortem about things. And really just like we end up finding out how truly like this couple have really just gone to or grown to really hate one another. I'm like, shouldn't they have just gone and just divorced one another? Like it seems that Emma already had a man that she was having an affair with, and eventually we end up finding out that Mark has kind of been doing the same. So why not just call it what it is? So but eventually it ends up being that there seems to be a lot more going on than just this couple being at this lake house. Eventually it ends up becoming more than that. And so, like, there was one part that I don't know if there was like a clip or something that I missed from this movie. Because all of a sudden there's be this like ad that was displayed throughout this movie. And then all of a sudden I ended up seeing this scene where all of a sudden we end up having these two scenes like co-intermingled between the other, and all of a sudden we end up having this guy coming into Emma's house. I'm like, okay, how is this all of a sudden happening? And how is it all of a sudden like we're getting Emma now talking to this guy and have it all eventually lead to these other two male guys who are arriving at this home also, and so on and so forth. So I was just kind of like, I was kind of just like, wait a minute, what? Like, how is it all of a sudden this becomes like a survival story where Emma is having difficulties figuring all this out to eventually having her all of a sudden bombarded with all these people coming to this lake house? I'm like, what is going on here? So anyways, so let's go into it. Let's go into that double five time territory because it's that customary time yet again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. So, very beginning of this, we end up finding out Emma is to be having an affair with her husband, and so it seems like this guy is so in love with Emma that it seems that he wants to escalate this relationship. And Emma is just like, well, you know what, that's great and all, but like I can't do it. Because this guy is like, well, hey, how about you and me together just for another extra day? And Emma's like, well, I can't do that either because me and my husband have an anniversary. So Emma goes off to see her husband, Mark. And so Mark is to be evidently a person that uh, he wants what he wants kind of person, because Emma is to come to Mark in this kind of black dress, and Mark is like, well, I like the red dress, right? And Emma's like, well, yeah, but I thought I could do something different. And so Mark is like, well, like, you know what, that's okay, because we can go back to our place and you can change. It's like, I'm like, wow. So, like, we're already kind of knowing that this guy, like, he wants what he wants and he's gonna get what he's gonna get. So he's that kind of guy. So we also have Mark, who evidently is to go and shuffle off his job probably to other people, because evidently he is to be this big lawyer that I guess is to just have everyone else do all the hard work, where he is to eventually just kind of take all the credit, probably. Who knows? Like, who knows how, like, really lazy this guy is. So Mark is to all of a sudden have a old case file of Emma's, and to go into her case and just kind of look at things. And I was like, okay, why are you going through that? Like, there is nothing that's going to change from that. And Mark is like, I know, but I just wanted to just check on things. I just want to look into things. So I guess to have some like foreshadowing moment. So Mark is to both have him and Emma go to this dinner, because of course it's their anniversary. uh Mark is to tell Emma, it's like, hey, did you get the flowers that I sent? And blah, 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 blah. So they end up going to this dinner together. And so Mark is to mention, it's like, well, I guess because of this anniversary being a specific kind of anniversary, that I guess that the gift that should be given is actually the gift of some kind of steel thing. And so Mark ends up giving Emma this steel necklace that is this big, goofy looking thing that honestly just doesn't really look all that good. But there's a whole reason for that. So Mark is to have uh, is to give Emma this steel necklace, which we end up finding out it's a necklace that seems impossible to take off, because there's a reason for that. So Mark ends up going and is going on this dinner, and so all of a sudden it seems that there is to be this young couple who is to eventually end up proposing. The guy is to propose to the woman, and so everyone is clapping, and so Mark is like, hey, like, do you remember when that was you and us? Like, do you remember that moment? Just like, yeah, like you're mine. You're like, remember, you're still mine. Remember all those moments when you were mine, kind of thing. I think that's really what he's saying, because there's some real just viciousness, uh, like some underhanded viciousness that I think that we're really getting from this story, like the more and more that we hear from these people, where it just kind of feels that also Emma is just to be kind of stuck where she is, that eventually she can't move on, and whichever. So after this whole dinner is to be done, Mark is to have Emma blindfolded, and so Mark is going to drive her to this location. And so Emma is now blindfolded, and she's like, you know what? I'm kind of getting tired of being blindfolded. Like, you've been driving for like more than an hour. Like, come on already. Like, what is this surprise? Like, this is ridiculous if I'm to blindfold myself for like this long. Like, come on. So eventually Emma just takes off the blindfold, and then Mark is to forcefully explain, it's like, okay, like, we're going to the lake house. Like, I had the people prepare everything, and we're gonna go to the lake house. Like, I thought like this would be a way of us just kind of uh, like putting back the spice in our marriage, or just kind of uh, like getting back to like us being by ourselves, is to like kind of like get us closer. So both of them end up going to this lake house, and so they end up just kind of talking about old times and everything like that, just kind of talking about old things. And so again, they end up going to sleep, and then the very next day, Mark decides that he's going to put a bullet to his own head and handcuff Emma to him. So now Emma is now forced to drag Mark everywhere she is to go, and coincidentally, Emma is to go into the closet, and the only real thing that she ends up finding there is Emma's wedding dress. And so Emma ends up taking this wedding dress and puts it underneath Mark, so that way Emma can easily drag Mark around throughout this entire house with this wedding dress, which I was like, man, that's really smart. Whoever thought of that, like really smart writing. And plus also like it's kind of a really cool like it's kind of like a really smart kind of thing where it's like yeah, use the one thing that was like to force these people together forever. Well, not force, but that's the wrong word, really. To put these two together forever, and so now she's using her wedding dress. There's like there's something about that that just seems like such uh, a kind of just interesting thing that they did there. So Emma is now having to go throughout this entire house to try to get the heck out of here. And weirdly, this woman doesn't have one thing of shoes on for whatever reason. Like, it doesn't even seem like there was any shoes throughout this entire house. So, all of a sudden, Emma is doing all this stuff barefoot, but then eventually she ends up tearing apart her dress to try and put shoes on her feet. Because eventually she has to even go outside her home, which is in the freezing cold. And I'm just like, man, like, so she's gonna go out there barefoot, which, like, if you, like, here's the thing. I know a lot of people are just like, hey, just go out there barefoot and whatever. Like, really, I have put in, like, the coldest of winters, like, I've just put, like, sandals on my feet and gone off to, like, check the mail or do some common day-to-day thing. I'm like, man, it is so freaking cold. Why did I put sandals on? But I'm like, nah, because I'm lazy. like, plus, you live in very cold climates, and you're just like, I can just burden the freaking winter for whatever. But then also you realize that you're not wearing the right shoes also for, like, certain icy, uh, like, places, like, spots, too, when it's wintertime. But, really, you know how to walk on the ice. Like, eventually you'll, like, there has been times where I've barely ever or rarely ever fallen on my batucas, uh, because, like, I know how to walk on the ice. But there's some times where you have just roads that are just covered in ice, and there's, like you have, like, an entire, like, just place of just ice everywhere, and so you're gonna fall. It's bound to happen. So, anyways, pushing on. So, Emma is to go, like, out to her, like, shed, and she ends up finding no tools. She ends up going down to her basement where all the tools are gone. She ends up trying to go into her kitchen to find any kind of something, and the kitchen is empty. Like, this guy has thought of everything, to where it just gets to the point when by the time that this girl, like, is to slug this body around everywhere she's to go, like, she's still cuffed to her husband until someone else arrives in her home. So she's just dragging this body around everywhere to try to figure out how she can eventually get free of this body. And so she ends up hauling this body all the way out to the car, and she ends up trying to start the car to realize that, I guess, Mark had put a perfect enough gas in it in the car just to make it to this spot, or maybe he ended up later on while Emma was sleeping. He ended up kind of wasting out the gas uh, to eventually have it be hard for Emma to try to get out of here. So Mark also put Emma's phone in this plant uh, where it was watered down, and so Emma tries to. I guess she didn't have any rice or anything, so Emma tries to use her phone and ends up finding out that her phone is too broken to use, and so she ends up just chucking her phone because her phone's no good. So eventually there is to be this message like play me, and so uh, Emma is to get these kind of things that Mark is to kind of tell her in a very crappy and condescending and whatever kind of way. But eventually when Emma is to have to haul Mark's body down these flight of stairs, which I'm like, oh my god, this seems so dangerous. But it seems that Emma kind of perfectly was able to drop this body down this flight of stairs. But we really just have a moment where like Emma is to like almost like grab this body and have to do some like unique things to just try to get anywhere, and to also try to do this quickly. So Emma goes down to this basement to find every single one of these tools are all gone. And so here's the moment where Emma is to mention that she has technically been dragging Mark's body like well before this moment. That eventually Emma has plenty enough times having to clean up after Mark when eventually Mark would come home and have all kinds of clothing that he had that eventually had like glitter or lipstick marks on it for whatever reason. And like I guess Emma had been doing all the cleaning and whatever, and so eventually like Emma would spot when it seemed that Mark had been just this lazy effer that just like Emma was to just consistently clean up after. So eventually Emma was dragging this body around. So eventually what ends up happening is that there is to eventually be a guy that arrives at this place. And so like here's a weird thing. The whole time that I was thinking this guy ends up arriving here, I'm like, has Emma lost her mind? Is she gone crazy? Like this doesn't quite make sense. How is it that she was able to uh, get anybody out here? Dot 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 dot. So there's a whole bunch of conclusions that I had to make here, but it seems that eventually Emma is to get this guy out here, and so it's to be this guy named Tom, I believe. So Tom is to eventually go on and try to understand this story and understand what the heck is going on. And he was like, you know what, I can't believe all of this has happened. This seems like a very far-fetched story. And I can't believe that this guy took his own life for how, like, rich he is, for how whatever. And so, and I was like, well, that's the story. Like, I'm freaking handcuffed to this guy. So, what eventually ends up happening is we end up having these two guys show up. This one guy named Jimmy and this one guy named Bobby Ray. So this guy ends up coming to this door and is to say that he is to be some kind of plumber or something like that because there is a pipe that got leaked. So Jimmy is to come to this door and to mention to this guy, hey, yeah, like Mark had called and there was a pipe that was to be leaking and I'm supposed to take care of it. And so Tom goes out there and he's like, well, like, hey man, it seems like you got the wrong house. Like, if anything, like, I'll give you money for like your trip out of here. but like you can go now, like you're done, like you don't have to do anything. And so Jimmy's like, well, hey, like that's okay, like I'm fine with that, but hey, can I use your facilities? Can I use the bathroom? And so the guy is like, well, the bathroom's out of order. He's like, out of order? Like, come on, I went all my way out here to use your bathroom. Like, can I just use your bathroom and go? The guy's like, I'm sorry, man, you can't. So eventually it just gets to the point where these guys really do have to like show their cards. And so what eventually just ends up happening is Jimmy is to really have to beat up this guy, and they end up killing this guy. And so now we end up finding out that Jimmy is tied to this guy named Bobby Ray. The Bobby Ray who had the picture on Emma's file because he had been, I guess, involved in some case of hers, but they ended up releasing him. So, Bobby Ray is coming back to kill Emma and to go and get Mark's safe. To open this up and to try to get supposedly these diamonds out of this safe. So, what ends up happening is Emma is to see that these guys are to try to break into this home, and so she ends up sneaking away to drag this body to eventually make it to this little house that has this boat inside of there. And so she ends up finding this anchor inside this boat, and she ends up mashing Mark's hand so that way she can get her hand free from these cuffs. And so eventually the guys are to eventually see this body and to see it dragged out here. And so Emma is now just kind of laying underneath this whole shack. And so they're like, hey, she must be like 1,000 miles from here now. And Bobby Ray is like, no, like think of it. Like she probably would not have gotten very far because all of the cars are here, and how would she have escaped? Plus, like she would have to escape on barefoot. That seems to be an impossible task. So eventually these guys are trying to figure out where she is throughout this home, and like this is to eventually like there's this consistent chase around where eventually Emma is to continue to be hiding in parts of this home, and eventually when these guys look for her, eventually she is to kind of maneuver her way to where she doesn't get seen, to the point of eventually Emma is to go and grab this gas tank that coincidentally was by this boat, drag it over to where this car is so that way she can have gas for this car. And when she ends up trying to pump the gas into the car, we end up having Bobby Ray that ends up kind of hearing this racket and goes out there to eventually try to see what's going on in this garage, and eventually ends up popping the tires so that way Emma doesn't get out of here with this vehicle. While Jimmy goes off and tries to get Mark's body because he has to drag him back into the house because there's a fingerprint that's to be needed to be for this safe. I'm like, they couldn't have just chopped it off because these guys have like a gun and a knife on them. Like this guy could have easily just chopped off one of the fingers, but I guess not. So they had to drag the whole entire body in there for whatever reason. So what ends up happening is eventually they end up catching Emma because there's only so many ways for her to hide. So eventually they catch Emma, and eventually Bobby Ray is to say that this girl is to have the combination for the safe, and it's to be the day that they ended up getting married. And so now there's this kind of back and forth between these three people because Emma's to bargain. It's like, well, hey, if how will I know that you guys aren't going to kill me once this safe is open? And so Bobby's like, hey, like if we get this money and we get out of here, like we're done. We're just gonna leave. But like Bobby did want to kill her, but Jimmy was trying to prevent that because like Bobby has just been with this girl one time before, so whichever. Anyways, so like he had left a scar upon her body. So eventually they do make a deal with Emma that they're going to leave her alone, and so she ends up giving them the combination, and they end up opening the case because there's supposedly diamonds in this safe, not case, safe. So all of a sudden he the only thing he ends up pulling out of this case is this bizarrish large saw slash knife, and all of a sudden the knife is to have this words that um, that the only way you're going to get the diamonds is if you basically cut off Megan Fox's head, because the actual diamonds are around this girl's neck. And so that's what the steel necklace was to hide the diamonds within this necklace. And so Emma can't take this off. And so we have Jimmy who has these like bolt cutters, and he's trying to cut the necklace off with his bolt cutters, but it's not going, it's not working. So eventually they're just tempted to cut off Megan Fox's head. But it seems like there's this back and forth, and everybody's to eventually just start like tossing over things. And so it eventually gets to what ends up happening is that Jimmy ends up dying because of the rustle and tussle of all this. And Emma is to eventually slap the cuffs on Bobby. And so now Bobby has to drag this body around and is to forcibly try to get after Emma and chase after her. Well, eventually Emma is to get the car started, and so she ends up trying to like run over Bobby like outside, and like, but eventually she ends up losing control of the car because she ended up getting stabbed in the leg, and she has no real good control over over like the brake and whatever this. And plus also they're around heavy amounts of ice, so eventually she's gonna spin out at some point. So all of a sudden this car ends up crashing into this into this, I think the boat shack thing. So Bobby goes to try and find where Emma is to eventually see her gone. And so eventually what ends up happening is Emma is to sneak away to try and just slide her way through this ice. And so Bobby goes after her. So what ends up happening is Bobby is chasing after her with body in hand. And so they're like trying to make it through this ice, and like it's the chase after one another. So what ends up happening is Bobby stooping stupidly, like they're already way too far out on this ice anyways. So Bobby just goes and keeps consistently trying to bash Emma, like basically through the ice. So I guess that he can drown her and kill her and then get the necklace afterwards. So, but what ends up happening is they crash through the ice, and of course Emma like has the ability of just getting away from Bobby and trying to swim to the surface to try to find some hole where she can breathe. And Bobby is just going to have to forcibly drown because Mark's body is too heavy for Bobby to really be able to swim and get really far, because this guy is just basically weighing Bobby down, so he can't really swim. So, or if he tries to, he's not going to get very far. So, Bobby is just going to drown, just going to die horrifically. And so, what ends up happening is luckily Emma is to have this knife. And so, Emma all of a sudden is to go and use this knife to cut through this ice to create an opening for her to be able to breathe, and then for her to be able to get out of this ice, or to get out of this icy water, and to just be like kind of laying on the ice. And that's pretty much where the movie's to end, to either naturally assume that Emma is may or may not be able to get the heck out of here and she might freeze to death, or that eventually, because I think, because what Emma ended up doing with the car that she was in, is she ended up like backing into the other cars. So I don't know if she can actually use either one of those cars or not. But we'll have, like, I guess we'll never know. So really, just the end of all this is just basically just like, we don't know whether Megan Fox's character really makes it out of here or not. We just have to naturally assume. But yeah, that's the real ending of all this. So hopefully I got most of this movie down. You're like, I'm always kind of concerned if there was something that I missed here, because really looking at this movie, it was like 74 some odd hours. So I might have missed something somewhere. Because I have to kind of question, it's like, okay, how is this only 70 some odd hour or 70 some odd minutes into this movie? Did I miss something? Is there something that, like, was there some kind of, like, plus there was also two scenes that were bizarrely intertwined with one another, where I'm just like, okay, I'm missing a lot of dialogue here, because all of a sudden you have these two different scenes that are intertwined with one another, because there was this spot where Emma was to go into this this photo room, and was to try to eventually find this like tape recording of Mark talking about stuff, but it was kind of bizarrely intertwined with some other scene, to where I was just like, okay, what the heck is going on here? Like, why is there a mixture of scenes in here together? It just seems so baffled or confusing to me. But bizarrely, I've seen that happen more than once, and so I always have to justify that maybe that's just this kind of approach or way of whatever going on. So, anyways, with that said, I think I'm going to call this one a wrap and get the heck out of here. So, yeah. If you guys like this movie, let me know. If you hated it, let me know. Whichever, let me know. But I'm going to get the heck out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.